call roll call, Mary.
Sam Spermato, Pat Rooney,
Here.
Hal Christensen,
Here.
Marcia Cox,
Here.
Carrie Thompson.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. A moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Amen.
Do I have a motion to review and accept the agenda for this session?
So moved.
Second.
Carrie?
Pat Rooney,
Yes.
Hal Christensen,
Yes.
Marcia Cox,
Yes.
Carrie Thompson.
Yes. So would you like to set this up, Mary? Make the call? We only have one Cerner, so there will be multiple on here?
Yeah, so it'll be Cerner, Gilsbar, and Mike Shunning. The actuary should be the three.
Okay.
I saw yesterday. Yeah, we do not know about dates.
Right.
You don't know what?
We don't know
Dates,
dates.
I didn't cover.
Oh,
Welcome to WebEx. Enter your access code or meeting number followed by pound.
what's Mike's last name?
If you are the meeting host, enter your PIN followed by a pound. If you are not the host, press pound.
Hello?
Hello,
Hi, is that Sharon?
it is.
Hi, okay. Hi. Carrie Thompson is here. All the trustees are here now, so I'm going to let Carrie take over.
So this is Sharon.
Yes.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sharon. How are you?
I'm good.
Gilsbar?
Is Gilsbar checking in on the same line?
I'm sorry, what?
I was gonna ask Mary a
I
question.
forwarded the...
No.
Sorry. Oh, okay. I forwarded the meeting reminder to everybody who was invited to the meeting.
Okay, but are they calling in on the same line?
They should be.
They're joining here.
I'll make a couple of calls just to make sure real quick.
Okay, we're just waiting, Sharon, for Gilsbar and the actuary to check in.
So Gilsbar is on, and Dave is on.
Okay.
Mike Shunning?
How about Mike Shunning?
Mike's here.
Okay, then we have all.
I think I did.
All right, so do you want to take the lead here?
Yeah, you'd like to, Madam Chair? Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Madam Chair, trustees, as background on this, this is a follow-up to the meeting of September 29th where the issue, where the trustees had a long, pronounced conversation with, amongst yourselves, with Gilsbar and with Cerner, where the effort was made to answer two basic questions. One is, what is the cost of a visit, of an episode of care at the clinic versus what would some facsimile of that cost in the community? So that was question number one. And then question number two was, for 5 specific disease states that have been discussed in Cerner's annual reports, was there any evidence of a cost differential or a reduction in claims, if you will, for those who had received care on those disease states at the clinic versus in the community? I watched the tape. You guys experienced it. Long meeting, a lot of questions. We went back yesterday and spoke both with Cerner and with Gilsbar. We've also looped in Mike Shunning, who's the actuary with Chiron that we brought with our proposal. And rather than go back into all of the details, because obviously there's a lot of concerns raised about the different methodologies that were used on both in answering both of those
Excuse me,
questions.
but you guys are cutting out. Yeah, sorry.
Cutting out on the phone.
I figured you probably knew that, so you probably just lower it.
All right, we're going to use a mic, and then you can let us know if that works out better.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay, can you guys hear me or is this thing on? I feel like I'm on The Voice.
Belt it out, Aaron.
All right, is that any better?
Is it turned on the machine?
Oh, I don't know.
You want to hold that?
So I'm just sitting over there then.
Yeah, we can move everybody ahead. Put this on the table over there.
I'll see you more, Mike. That works.
Have to turn it on.
Turned on.
Mine.
Push that button and hold down.
Okay. All right. We can do some killing stuff. Okay, so to go back, so at the September 29th, there was a long discussion about answering the two questions that the trustees had posed. One is, what is the cost of a visit at the clinic versus some facsimile of a comparable type visit in the community at large? So how do we get a comparison of what those two costs are? And then secondly, for the 5 disease states that are mentioned in the annual reports by Cerner, is there any evidence to indicate whether or not there's been a claim savings in the management of those disease states? Again, Cerner's the clinic versus what's happening in the community. Long discussion, a lot of concerns were raised between the companies as the methodology that had been used in the two spreadsheets that were presented during that time. So we circled back yesterday, both with Cerner and with Gilsbar, and kind of walked through the issues. And what we came back to was both sides had raised concerns. Gilsbar specifically had talked about, and Cerner had talked about, there's been this whole issue about how coding is done. Is it ICD-10s? Is it CPT codes? And how they're done. But long story short, we could not get to agreement. So what we proposed to do is to come back before the trust to discuss the issues with the chair, make sure we've got those two questions nailed. This is what we're trying to get to. We are trying to get to some kind of a comparator. We are trying to get to an idea of cost. I'd like to clarify the issue of what coding or facsimiles of coding are available from Cerner that we can then translate over to Gilsbar. And our intent is to offload that data from Cerner, offload the data from Gilsbar, and then pass it to Mike Shunning, the actuary from Chiron, because Mike does work with clinics of this type in the Las Vegas area that are run by some of the unions up there. And to see if we can get data that we can all agree is at least reasonable. What kind of our take, frankly, is that there may not be direct parallels. So we're going to have to see if we can come up with a methodology that gets us within a range that will reasonably allow you as trustees to address those questions. Okay? Questions for trustees versus anybody on the phone at this point? Okay, so for clarification purposes from my end, and just so everybody hears the same thing at the same time, for the folks at Cerner, can you kind of walk us through how it is that you track distinct episodes of care internally? If you're not using ICD-9s, if you're not using, what is the mechanism that you're using to track the number of visits and then separately the number of services that occur in each of those visits?
Okay, this is Melissa. I'm a data analyst on the Healthy Employer Analytics team. What we use today for our reporting is the visit data. And that's in the follow-up email list was provided of the various visit types. So a patient comes in, say, for an immediate same-day appointment. That's the equivalent of an urgent care appointment in acute. So they come in for an immediate same-day appointment, say they have strep throat. So that information is logged. We do not log specific procedure codes. We do sometimes, well, when an order is necessary, an order is logged under that encounter. So one of the questions that were outstanding was what's an encounter ID, and that is a visit ID. So they come in under a single visit, they're booked into PowerChart, which is the reporting tool, or the recording tool, I should say. And so that information is logged along with the diagnosis code. And we're using an ICD-10 code that any data pulled prior to September of 2015 will have ICD-9 code. that's in a nutshell what we provide in our visit data. And supplementary to that, we have orders which are entered when necessary, and they can be either for internal procedures done, or they can be external referrals or any procedures that we can't conduct on site. So, in a nutshell, that's what you guys have seen. You've seen our visit data, and you've seen our orders data.
And is the order, so, I'm sorry, is the orders the equivalent of services? Because we noticed in the meeting there was a distinction that there was what I would believe was somewhere north of 4,000 encounters in a particular period of time, and that in those 4,000 encounters were somewhere north of 5,000 services. So is that the distinction you're drawing? That in some of those encounters there were multiple services provided?
Just a moment again. Yeah, we don't define services because in orders, we may be providing that service on site, but we may not. So we stick to the orders. There's an order ID associated. So we don't use the word services, but I did see that reference in the email, and we want a clarification on that as well.
So you're using the term orders. Is it possible that that's an equivalent to services?
It's possible, but again, with the orders, we may or may not be conducting that order or procedure on site. So I think calling it services may be misleading. I think maybe that terminology may have come from Gilsbar or somebody else.
Okay, and then is there a specific number of types of encounters that would happen, like a wellness woman, a well woman, or a well child visit, a WOW visit, or an urgent care visit? Are there some specific number of categories of those visits that occur?
Well, the orders they're pretty standard. I believe in the EMR, which is PowerChart, where the nurse or practitioner is logging this information. I believe they select from a drop-down to select the visit type. And that's, again, where you see the immediate today, or you see illness initial, illness follow-up, or physical, that kind of thing. So they are working from a specific, and I'll say limited list. It's a list designed specific to your needs, but still able to allow us to standard recording from it.
Okay, so we could get some kind of a breakdown of the number of visits by your internal categories that would be discrete visits for periods of time.
Yeah, we provided visit data exactly like that. We do it with our quarterly reporting or our annual reporting on the savings summary. We have our various visit types along with the number of visits that were conducted for the reporting period. So that we can certainly break that down for you just in a spreadsheet. But the raw data you received is also, it has that information in it.
Okay.
I have a question, and I know Nicole has a question.
Well, I just wanted to see if I heard correctly that prior to December 2013, you used IC9 codes or ICD-9 codes, but then was it correct?
It changed.
It was 2013 now.
This is 2015,
2015.
September of 2015.
Can you ask them?
Yeah.
Can you verify when you switched from ICD-9 to ICD-10 codes?
Sure, it was September of 2015. I believe September 26th, if I recall correctly.
And that was a national transition from 9 to 10 when this was changed. I have one question. On the number of services, so, and I'm trying to remember what this spreadsheet said, but I think it was somewhere around 5,026 or something, and prior to that we had been given a number of, I think it was somewhere around 4,700 and over 4,700 visits. And so that information, my understanding was that, and I'm assuming this, and Dave, maybe you can confirm this, that that information came through your office, Dave, to us, and my understanding was that that was what you got from Cerner. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, so the services, and the way that I understood the explanation was that a service could be multiple things that could be done at one office visit, because at some prior meeting, what we were discussing was the convenience that some people had, that they could go into their nurse practitioner at the clinic and talk about 2 or 3 different problems, and if they had to go to the community doctor, they might have to have other visits. And so it was identified that in that 4,700 visits or whatever it was, that there were over 5,000 services completed. Is that true?
That was my understanding.
Okay, so can you kind of give us some background on who from Cerner you got that from? Because what I just heard, was it Melissa? What I heard you say was that you didn't provide those services.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, I'm asking who you got it from Cerner. If you got that from Cerner, I mean, because Melissa's saying that they didn't give that.
You got a coordination between Guild Bar tracking the visits outside versus tracking visits inside. And again, we all know that when they went to Cerner's on-site clinic there was many services delivered at that time. If Melissa can track it a different way and talk about the actual services, not just the orders, but the actual services, then that should be a good measure of what the staff that are at the center is doing.
Right, so I'm just trying to confirm that the 5,000 plus services that you gave us, that was forwarded to Gilsbar, came from Cerner.
Well, Ken, I can't give you that information. It has to come from Cerner. There's only 2 places it can come from. It can come from Cerner or it comes from Gilsbar, one of the 2.
Okay. So Melissa, when you said that those 5,000 services didn't come from you and you're Cerner, I guess I'm just confused about that.
Let me, Melissa, just for clarification, you're just asking how they obtain the Cerner data. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how the data was obtained and the chain of command, or the, you know, who handed it to who and how did it get to Gilsbar, so we used it.
This is Dale Darren. I'm actually the manager of analytics over here at Cerner. That file, we don't have an NDA directly signed with Gilsbar, just to let you know. So we can't funnel information to them directly without they have to get in the middle of it.
Yeah.
That has to be, the file doesn't come from us, and Gilsbar never directly worked with us or anything like that. So until an NDA was signed or anything like that, we can't disclose any of that data at all.
Okay, well that's very confusing, but again, my point was that you gave it to Dave, who is our consultant, and he forwarded it to Gilsbar so that it could be used in this, this data comparison, right?
Correct.
So,
George, I think the confusion is I sent files to Dave. I did not send files to Gilsbar.
right, but that, I mean, the purpose of you sending them to Dave was so that they could get to Gilsbar, is that true?
Correct.
Okay, so, I mean, we're kind of trying to figure out how many spots are on the horse here.
This is Brian Baker with Cerner. Dave, did you make it clear to us that that's what you wanted the data for? Because I think there was some confusion on what data we sent. We did send some wrong data, but in terms of I mean, you know, you asked for stuff and then you forward it on without us having a clue what exactly it is you're sending.
I'm sending what trustees asked me to obtain from Cerner, and since you didn't have a BAA with Gilsbar, I do have a BAA for both Cerner and Gilsbar. I received the information and forwarded it to Gilsbar. Gilsbar then did analysis and reported it to the trustees.
I think you were talking about an NDA,
But
right?
since there is no IC, there was no, since Cerner doesn't track the services that they deliver at the center the same way you would do if you were tracking a claim,
and I haven't heard this said yet, so Melissa, you can jump in, anybody from our team can jump in, but we do not do CPT codes, we do ICD-10 codes. And since we don't do billing, one of the things that we did provide from our clinic office was we got on Google and we looked up CPT codes and gave those to someone at LHUSD, and then they in turn gave that to Guildbar. The problem with that is there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of CPT codes, and there's no, it'd be difficult to just assign one without knowing exactly what was done, so we don't track CPT codes. I guess what I want clarification for this group is that CPT codes and ICD-10 codes are not the same thing, and I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, because I'm hearing some confusion, and I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
This is
And
Aaron.
I've been saying that all along. It's going to be very difficult for Guildbar to match it up because you don't track it that way. That's what I've been saying since day one.
This is Aaron. Hey, Mike Shunning, Mike, have you encountered this before in terms of how the data was formatted so that we can come back to, let's just go to the easy one, to what the average cost of a visit is at the clinic? Have you encountered this before, and do you have any suggestions for how the data might be formatted to deliver to you?
Well, just again, the clinics I work with track CPT codes, so it's a lot easier to do it because we're talking the same language.
Yep.
So what you're going to have to do is really look at, as I'm listening to this from the clinic side, they're classifying visits under what their coding is. So we need to understand from them what they're calling a visit. They're doing ICD-10 fine. We know what it looks like. They've got classification of visits. Then they say they've got orders. We need to be able to differentiate for the orders, which orders are they actually doing in-house versus those that went out of house. And if you don't know that, there's no way you can do a comparable analysis. Because basically the clinics has a cost of, here's the cost of doing their visits plus the cost associated with the services that they're providing, not the ones that go out. Once you understand that, then it is possible to build a bridge to say, okay, Guildbar, this is the way you need to code the data to get something comparable on an encounter basis. It's a little bit more complicated, but it is possible then to take the CPT data that they're collecting, isolate that back into a true encounter, so it's, you're looking at, here's the date the visit happened, error lab, imaging test, or whatever that happened within a specific time frame. Usually it's a day or two around the date that the visit happened, to really coalesce them together to get a comparable per visit cost. Takes a little bit of work, but that's really the way you have to do it.
Right, but Melissa, didn't you say that in the beginning when you were talking, you said that you have encounter IDs that include things like immediate same day, which is about the equivalent of an urgent care? Is that,
And the encounter ID is specific to that patient and that visit. So the encounter ID is not specific to the visit type. The visit types are grouped by the visit names as they're outlined in the recording you've seen, and that's immediate same day, illness initial, illness follow-up.
right.
We do have in-house procedures that we've done, and what was just stated is correct. We can identify the procedures that were done in-house, and we can provide that information to Lake Havasu. And then, yeah, it won't be an exact science, but it will be a closer number to what I think the goal is here.
Right, so the raw data that was sent over, and I think the chain of command was, it went to Dave and then it went to Cerner or Guildbar. The raw data information included your visit data types, the immediate same day, sick visit, that kind of thing. That was on, in your raw data, I think you had 3 different tabs on that. So would it be okay, or would it be possible for Mike, for example, to maybe, or Cerner could come to an agreement that, how can we define what the equivalent CPT code in the commercial world would be compared to your immediate same day or your sick visit, well visit, whatever.
Right, and just like Brian stated earlier, there are thousands of CPT codes, and we can narrow it beyond what we think it is. But again, because we don't do billing, we don't track the procedure codes. We don't track that information. It's not necessary because we're not billing on a per visit or a per procedure. So we can provide it, like I said, from the orders, which ones were done in-house, and it would be an entirely manual process on my side or Gilbart's side to look up the CPT codes that they would assume those to be to match their data.
Madam Chair, this is Aaron. I think what I'd like to propose is that you refer it back to us. We'll quarterback a teleconference between Cerner, Shunning, ourselves, and Gilsbar, see if we can come to agreement on how the fields can be formatted, downloaded, and then we'll back into it. I think if we get everybody at the table, you can tell there's obviously going to be a range of issues, there's going to be some subjectivity to how those things are allocated. But if we can come back to a reasonable facsimile, we can then present it, warts and all, and anybody that's got a question on the methodology that we use, we can walk through it, and you guys can render your judgment as trustees as to whether or not we've gotten back into the range of what you were looking for or not.
I have one question for Gilsbar. Is Gilsbar online?
Yeah, it's right here.
When we talk about the CPT codes per visit, is only one code attached to a visit, or do physicians bill for multiple CPT codes during a single visit?
Yeah, that could happen if you had a visit. So say you went to the doctor's office, obviously they're going to bill for a CPT code for an office visit. But if there were particular services done at that office visit, then it would be broken down by like a benefit line on the claim. So they'll bill different CPT codes, but it'll all roll under one claim.
Right.
So we'll be able to see, like, if somebody went to the doctor's office, they would have a CPT code for that. If they got a shot for, some kind of respiratory infection, then they'll have a CPT code for that.
So when you go back to assign CPT codes to a visit with Cerner, are you going to assign all that apply or a single code?
I guess that's something we'll have to discuss to come up with a fair comparison, kind of what Aaron just mentioned.
Okay. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And then, Madam Chair, just there's been discussion, and to get it on the table here, when Sharon and I and Jamie talked, Sharon sent us a non-disclosure agreement also, and I've had an exchange of emails with Sharon going back and forth. We do have some concerns about the scope of the non-disclosure agreement and whether or not it conflicts with our basic contract and our ability to report back to you guys. So what I'd like to get is permission. There's two elements here. One is you as the trustees relative to us supervising us as a vendor. I'd like to get permission to send that non-disclosure agreement to your council to make sure that they're comfortable that we can operate within the confines of that and still meet our obligations to you. In addition, I'll send it to my corporate counsel to make sure that from my end that I'm not teeing up kind of an issue, with liability on your behalf or ours. I've said to Sharon the thing. I get that we have no interest in their proprietary materials, relative to the operation of the clinic or the services they provide. But for purposes of this study, we're going to need access to the trust's specific data on incidence and frequency of care and whatnot, so we can make a comparison. So I just don't want to get crossways with that non-disclosure agreement and the trust. So that if whatever motion you make, ultimately what we're going to suggest is that you direct staff, ECA, to work with Cerner, Chiron, and Gilsbar to pull the reports, the information that's necessary to make the comparison, to answer the two questions. What's the cost of a visit in the clinic versus outside, and any information we can get to determine whether or not the 5 disease states, there's a difference in cost for those who have those disease states treated at the clinic versus in the community.
I guess I have one other question on that, and it is that we have a consulting agreement signed with Mr. Stewart that is, I think it's in effect until December 31st of this year. And we also have an agreement signed with ECA, which is Aaron's organization, and it was effective October 16th, I think. So what would be the difference in you working with Aaron and you working with Dave? Isn't it the same thing? Cerner?
So I think I would have to go back and just talk with our legal counsel. I don't know the answer to that, Marcia.
Okay. Because they're both consultants for the EBT. I mean, we both, you know, we've signed agreements with both of them. And I don't think that there's a limitation in our relationship with Cerner that we have a limit on the number of consultants that we can have. And as long as we provide you with documentation that he's also a consultant, I guess my point is if you didn't require Dave to sign an NDA, I don't know why we're asking Aaron to do the same thing.
Well, I think we did. We have an agreement with Dave. I mean, we're talking about our proprietary information, and we know that somebody else may be involved in it. I have to go back to our legal team and talk with them before, you know, we can do that.
Okay. I guess I just want to make sure that.
So this is Brian Baker with Cerner. Sharon's got to follow her legal procedures. I think one of the things that I think would be open to, I think it just needs to be a request made, is that if Aaron would like to have an NDA with us, then we just need to have that conversation. I think it would be better for both parties if we only had one person to communicate with. Since Dave is leaving, I think it'd be better for us to work with Aaron. I think it's from what I've read, a reputable organization. They have experience doing this. I don't think that's a problem. I think I would recommend that Aaron, you and your team would just reach out to us and say, can we have a non-disclosure agreement with you? We'd be glad to have that discussion. I don't think that would be a problem. I think that would alleviate any miscommunication that would exist in transition, because I think this study and this information and these discussions will go beyond December 31st.
Yeah, we're not, for the record, we're not opposed to an NDA. We want the NDA limited to proprietary information relative to Cerner's operations and methodology. We want to exclude from it any of this type of information that might be used to evaluate the costs. And when you think about it, just follow it through the logical thing. We're going to have to produce a report that we're going to sit in a public forum that's on videotape because it's a public meeting. We don't want to run into an issue where that information is then held to be subject to the NDA. So that's what we're trying to make sure we can actually do the work and then do the report without in any way impinging on the proprietary models.
Yeah. We would agree with that. We don't have a problem with that. I mean, I don't have a problem with that, and I've served on local governing boards like this before, so I completely understand what you want to do. And I will say that we have done this kind of exercise with other government clients when there's been full disclosure and everyone's been open about what they want to find. So I think that one of the things that we would be glad to do is to work with your new consultant as to how to organize this. It sounds like they have some experience in working with the clinics. I think that would be very helpful to everybody involved. So in that regard, I think that we're glad to cooperate in terms of what is best in terms of cost and cost analysis.
Do we need to address anything specific on the second question with the 5 disease states?
Well, this is Marcia. From my chair, I guess again, the purpose of the, sharing information or discussing it in September was that it was actually two different things. It was the cost comparison, and that analysis, and then the second part of it was, the disease state and are the patients or the cohort or however we were going to measure that, has there been a savings or has there been an improvement in health conditions for the people that are going to the clinic? Because again, this all circles back around to the fact that when we get those 5% increases every year for your management fee, we have nothing to tie it to except for the satisfaction survey that talked about, if you were able to get into the office in 3 minutes or less and were people friendly to you and things like that, that had nothing to do with the overall health of the people being treated there. So we were trying to tie it back to that. And so I guess that's still question number 2. And I guess, it's a separate question.
As I understand it, and I'll let Krista and Sharon address this as well, our contract agreement allowed for that 5% increase that you all agreed to. There were no performance guarantees in the contract. We would have been glad to discuss that, but is that correct? I mean, we followed the contract phase as it was requested. So in terms of if you want to see results, I think that is not a problem. I think we also sent over information, Chris, if I'm corrected the cohort. We went back and did a full core overview from the 2013 to now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And we sent that information, discussed the correct cohort.
Yeah.
And it showed improvement as well in that cohort, if I recall correctly. So.
Our work, Madam Chair and Marcia and for Cerner, our work assumes that we're going to try and answer two questions. I think of the two, it's not going to be, none of them will be simple. I think the simpler of the two, relatively speaking, is going to be the issue of coming back into some kind of a range of comparison on the costs. I think the second one, we'll have to flesh that one out as we go as to how we compare between the Cerner outcomes in the cohort data and then how we translate that over to GILSBAR for the general population for those same primary diagnoses. That one will definitely be harder. That's going to be a lot more subjective.
And what do we think on timeline to get this done?
I would, Shana, you can jump in here. I'm thinking that once we have the data, I would think 4 to 6 weeks. Mike?
Depending on the quality of the data. I mean, without knowing what it is we're looking at, that's not unreasonable, but it could be longer if it's really, really messy data.
So our intent would be to circle back, if not tomorrow morning, depending on availabilities on schedules, and certainly on Monday with the holiday coming up, get all parties on the phone, start walking through what fields are available there. And I think, frankly, that might be an easier way to ultimately address the NDA issue too, because we can, once we have a handle on what the data is, I think we can segregate that from the operational questions and get the language of the NDA wired back down so we can get this thing done. So that would be my expectations. Most likely, is for argument's sake, I can get back with these guys and see if we can schedule a meeting for Monday, Tuesday, early next week after the holiday to get the data mapped out that we're going to be asking for. And then once we have the data, figure 4 to 6 weeks from that point to get the report back to you.
So what will GILSBAR's role be at this point? Any or?
Well, they'll be in the consultation too, because what we're discussing is to see if they're anticipating any questions when we're mapping over, trying to come through the comparables. I think mostly it will be driven by myself, Mike Shunning, and the Cerner folks in terms of how that data can be sorted initially on the Cerner side. The GILSBAR stuff will be much more standardized because of the way it's built.
Because of the way they track things.
Well, yeah,
This is Neil from GILSBAR. We can just send our normal claims extract along with the data definition. And like Aaron's saying, that's a pretty standard format, so we can provide that whenever.
So that's how we get the costs that we're paying out according to the Blue Cross Blue Shield discount is on the GILSBAR side.
Correct. Yeah, there'll be some kind of again, without looking, Mike's got it right, we're not sure, we're really going to be guessing, at this point we're guessing as to how that extract then comes from the Cerner side, and I think that'll really drive a lot of the conversation, because then we'll back into that we'll take that, come back to some kind of an expense component that we allocate to each of those and then compare it. So.
Okay, so on the cost on the Cerner side, we are going to take out the cost for prescriptions and labs when doing the analysis?
I know the scripts will be out. We'll have to decide whether or not labs are.
They weren't in that per visit.
Whether or not labs are will be depending on how what happens in an encounter in the Blue Cross side. Whether or not those would be for the comparable codes that we're using. Whether or not those might include labs. So we'll have to look at it and determine that.
So there'll be a way to capture labs because labs are done usually through like Sonora Quest or LabCorp are ordered outside an office visit in the community also. So are those costs, will then, if you're including labs on one side, you're going to include all the labs on the other side?
Long story short, we're going to do our best to come back to a comparable figure. I think what would be different here, what I would hope would be different here, is that we'll be working on it collaboratively. So to the degree that the firms identify, hey, we disagree on that, if nothing else, we will footnote the report where the disagreements are, and then you can render your own judgments as trustees as whether or not we hit that mark.
Okay.
And just for clarification on the lab side, I know there are clinics, there are physicians' offices that actually do charge for the labs in-house, and then they pay the labs directly, or they send their patient, to a certain lab, and then the patient and their insurance is charged. So either way, there's a lab encounter or a charge involved. So the way that Cerner does it is they pass through the charge to us, so it is part of their overhead, just as some other doctor here in town could do the exact same thing.
All I'm saying is that if we include the costs on one side, we need to include the costs on the other. If we exclude it on one side, we should exclude it on the other. Doesn't matter to me which way the analysis is done, as long as it's the same.
Consistent.
Because when it was presented last time, that was not true. Any other, do you see anything else we need from?
Oh, it's just a little
pardon?
procedural question. And I think Marcia might have answered it here, but there was a lot of background racket going on, so I'm not quite sure. Does each procedure constitute a visit, or can there be multiple procedures in a visit?
There can be multiple procedures in a visit.
Okay, that was my only question.
Looks like a suggested motion, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Okay. So suggested motion would be that ECA be directed to work with Mike Shenning of Chiron, with representatives from Cerner and with representatives from Gilsbar to compile the information necessary to come up with an estimated cost comparison for the costs of a visit at the Cerner clinic versus a generally comparable visit through the community and the Blue Cross network. And secondly, to review the data to determine whether or not there's any indication of cost savings for services for the 5 identified disease states provided in the Cerner annual report for those receiving care through the clinic for those disease states versus in the community at large. And that ECA would be authorized to have any necessary non-disclosure agreements reviewed by counsel for the trust to make sure there's no conflict between our contract with the trust and the scope of services we're being asked to provide in this instance.
Excuse me, it's a work session, so we can't have a motion today.
This is Brian Baker. I have a quick question. Aaron, I have a quick question, if you don't mind, if I can ask real quick. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
The question I have is, in looking at cost, one of the things I'd like to know is, since 2013 or 2012, we started that mid-year 2012, can we get an analysis in terms of whether your claims have gone up or down in terms of total claims made, and if you've seen a reduction in claims? And then also, can we get an analysis of maybe the percentage increase in the healthcare plan cost, separate from the clinic, like in terms of what the annual payout is for a person, a teacher on the health plan? Has that gone up 10%? Has it gone up 12%? Has it gone up 5%? Oh, that's 2012. Or we can use 2013 as a base year, since that was the first full year of the clinic. Is there a way we can get that information as part of the cost analysis?
Yes, we did this past year have Gilsbar run a 5-year report, which I think would take us back to almost the start of 2013, if not 2014. That we looked at the reduction in office visit costs on that side. So that has been generated, but Gilsbar could then forward that to ECA. for you guys to work with.
I think there was another question. Did you have a question? No? You're good?
I think everybody was just acknowledging.
The
it's a
other
work
question I
session,
have
so
in
you
terms
can't vote.
of the cost analysis is, some teachers don't pay a copay to go to the clinic, but as I understand it, they do pay a copay to go to the doctor's office. Is there a way to calculate what we're saving the employee in terms of not having to pay a copay? Because I think that should also be included in the cost analysis as well.
I think when we talked about having the cost calculated at the last meeting, we did discuss calculating what the total cost was and then the cost to the trust, because there was a share with the employee on that, and using both those numbers as a comparison to what the cost at Cerner was.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's also included in that analysis. And then the other question I would have is, and I don't know if the school district can provide this, but it would be interesting to know too, is if you've seen a reduction in absenteeism from teachers being in the classroom, and if you've seen a reduction in your substitute requests due to having the clinic more accessible to the teachers. I know that that's not a cost analysis, that's more of an indirect cost savings, but it would be nice to know if the district, and if it hasn't, then, you know, obviously that's you'll know. But it'd be interesting to know since 2013-ish or so, if you've seen a reduction in substitute needs and absenteeism or time off, because that is a cost to the school district in terms of having to bring in a substitute and pay that substitute while that teacher's on leave.
I will certainly kind of forward that on the district side, but one of the issues we run into is we need to be able to split the absence into categories, whether it was district business leave or actual illness or personal days, like what kind of sub is being requested. And
Yes.
I guess maybe we can ask if that's possible
Yeah, I would-
on that side.
Yeah, and I said it may not be possible, but I think it's a good question to ask, just in terms of, again, looking at inadvertent cost analysis that may not be considered.
So I think we would be able to make the motion at our meeting next week to take care of those issues. It will just put the data a week behind.
I mean, I think honestly, Madam Chair, I think from our side, we can start moving. In the meantime, pending a formal action, I think we need a formal vote. I didn't hear
And I
any yelling
can.
objections, so I think, you know.
Yeah. Nicole?
Since it was brought up, I'm wondering if Cerner's open to any performance metrics after this study is done, because I think that's important for our district, and I understand that they think that everybody signed on to that, but we all know that everybody didn't sign on to that. That was signed without a majority of the trust's knowledge. So I'm wondering if Cerner's open to that.
I think that's more of a question whether, once we have the data, a contract negotiation on your side.
Yeah, the question that was basically asked is that Cerner at some point open to a discussion of either within the existing contract or amendment to the contract to some form of measurable performance guarantees? And I don't know if that's appropriately agendized for today or not.
I guess I'm a little confused about that though, because I remember, and I could go back and find what meeting it was at, when Dave said that that was absolutely something he could approach Cerner at, because we were looking at trying to tie outcomes to that performance and increase that incentive, the 5%.
In the last meeting that we were in, there was a discussion about the fact that back earlier this year, we were going to have the school district legal team and the Cerner legal team kind of get together and look at the contract. And we had proposed some time. Sharon and Krista, I think, were involved in that conversation as well. We never heard back from the district, and it sort of got laid to rest. So I think if you're a client, if you would like to discuss something around those issues, I think we'd be glad to have that conversation.
we have about 5 minutes left. Cerner does have a hard stop at the top of the hour.
What was the question, Sharon?
I just wanted to let you know we have about 5 more minutes left.
She's just telling me.
I thought you wanted to ask
finish.
something because we had 5 minutes. Okay.
I guess if we wanted to continue the conversation after they're off the phone, I don't know how we do that, but if we're not done in 5 minutes, but,
We can
Well,
continue
they
our
just
meeting.
hang up and you'll still be on the phone
right,
if you want to talk to the other people.
right. Okay.
Any further
I guess the
questions?
question will be, is there anything else needed from Cerner? Because we seem to kind of have our marching orders and what we need to do and working with Aaron, so I think we all are clear on that. Is there anything else you need from us?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Then I think that we will head to our next thing that we have to take care of, and you guys can let us know if anything else comes up. And of course, Aaron, feel free to contact anybody from our team, and we will work with you guys and go from there.
We will, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The host left the meeting. This meeting will end in 5 minutes.
Do we need Gilsmar and shutting on the phone at this point anymore, Manager?
I don't think so. I think we're,
If we do, they were the host, so you'd have to figure it out.
yeah, I think we're good at this point with,
So Gilsmar and Shunning, if you guys want to ring off, you're welcome to.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And then next time, we'll have either this district or you host the meeting, so we don't have to have a hard stop. I'll suggest that.
Well, we need a new phone system because we don't have conference call capability here.
Maybe we should pass the bond and try to do that.
Well, I'm open.
We're getting new computers.
The
You
new
can do it through the
telephone
phone.
system.
You can do it through the new computers. All right.
And Madam Chair, just as in a related vein, on the clinic, just in general, I think you're all aware that we do have a misalignment in the term of the contract with Cerner versus what's going on with the lease. So we've had a conversation with Carrie, how we're going to be asking you for some help, and then going forward, picking up a local realtor to do that. From our perspective, advisory and the thing that we also understand, and Cerner alluded to it, there is a question about the validity of the contract that has been raised prior to our arrival, and it's relative to how it was signed and whether or not the evergreen provision was applied. So there is a bigger issue with this.
Right.
I want to point out the importance of these things are all happening very rapidly. That lease is coming up in February. If the contract is legal, which I think is ultimately a question for your council, it does expire in 2020. So we're going to be talking about a lease on a building, we're going to be talking about a contract that we have a question about the legality or that apparently has been presented before. So we are intending, barring some other direction from you, to move forward on negotiating a lease that would parallel the expiration of that contract for 2020. I think that makes sense to do. I think as trustees, you have a question yourselves that needs to be addressed between you and council, and we'll be happy to participate in that conversation as to the legality of that renewal, and if that's going to have any impact on the terms of a lease that would be negotiated on that building. I think there is a sense of urgency on that given the impending expiration of the lease. So I throw that out there, and I understand there's multiple balls in the air on this thing, and they are coming together rapidly. So our assumption, barring direction to the contrary from you, is to assume that the Cerner lease is renewed until 2020 and to move forward negotiating a lease with that 2020 expiration date in mind, barring some alternative direction from you.
Carrie talked to me about the lease, and the realtor that represents the owner works side by side with me at Coldwell Banker. So I gave Carrie the name of another commercial realtor here in town that would be completely independent. So, and he could represent the district.
so we can touch base
Okay.
right after this.
So then I guess the other question is, as far as the validity of the Cerner agreement, because there's still some questions and things, and based on what you guys have read, do we need to try and have a conversation with legal counsel on what in fact we're dealing with? I mean, because we've got things that weren't signed or not in meeting minutes and no votes and things like that. So do we need to get that done before, we finalize an agreement with the new lease?
I believe that would be absolutely necessary and appropriate from a fiduciary perspective.
I do too.
Because the question's been raised, about, when we looked at the contract, and again, Reg, you guys know we weren't here, but it's signed, it's not dated, it is signed. It's signed using a title that, to our knowledge, doesn't exist, the vice chair, which was not, to our knowledge, moved on in a public meeting. Okay, that is not a format that we have followed in our practice. I don't know how that ties in with what the practice of the district was. The alternative argument is there is evergreen language in that contract. So I don't know if that evergreen language negates the need for formal vote, since the contract was adopted presumably correctly by a preceding fiduciary. Those are questions that go beyond us. We can obviously facilitate the conversation based on our experience in the plain language of the contract, but I believe you need counsel as a trust to come to an agreement amongst the 5 of you, and we will in parallel move forward with negotiation on the building contract, pending what decision you will make with your counsel.
So I have a question for you. Have you ever, in working with other, clients that you have, worked with evergreen contracts that typically the normal protocol was to discuss annual renewals and different changes and whatnot, and vote even though there was an evergreen provision in place?
We have and we do work with evergreen contracts.
Okay.
And they include, they're evergreen. So they include a provision that they do automatically renew unless, they're 1-year terms.
Right.
But they automatically renew unless one party gives notice. I believe it's 120 days ahead, and the other one's 100 days. So typically the vendor would have to give us notice cancellation. I believe it's 180 days in the standard contract, and the trust would have to do 120.
Right.
So we do work with contracts that have that evergreen provision. Where this one is unique to us is that it's a 3-year evergreen. We're not, I get it with a physical plant and that kind of a thing, but that part is unique to us. And again, our clients have a long-standing practice that they're done in public meetings. There is a process. It's not so clear to us what the practice of this trust was.
Well, at the time that was signed, the trust wasn't having open meetings. So, and I guess the other part of that is that because the amendments, and I think there's a total of 4,
I think that's correct.
those had other things that were being changed. It wasn't just an automatic renewal of the agreement. It was either changing staffing or changing, there are a couple that we changed the salary rate, or we changed full-time, part-time, those kinds of things. So that actually would, I would expect that would be something that would be subject to open meeting discussion.
In our practice, Madam Chair and Marcia, in our practice, in the renewal process, we'll duplicate this with you on a going forward basis. That as the budget is done and the rates are established every year, there's a detailed memo that literally goes through every item that compiles up to the rate, including whether or not there's no change in the rate. So even if it is an evergreen, but it would specify what the rate was and the charges were, what the changes would be. So literally it would say no change to blah, 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 or here's the changes.
Right.
And then to the degree that there was a material change in the scope of services, that would be called out separately. Because it would presume that there was some scope of work change that would require an affirmative vote by the trustees. Even that listing is done by vote in our practice.
And I think that's appropriate. This is public money. So, like the last one that was done, the change, or the monthly management fee was on there, and there was also, if I remember right, that that the trust wasn't going to continue with a part-time medical assistant or something. There was a number of positions or FTEs in there. So we actually eliminated the cost or salary of one half-time person, but the fee stayed the same.
And I think, again, we can tell this is a hot topic issue. There's a lot invested in the clinic on all sides to it. There's a lot of substantive questions. I think you guys are agreeing. I think, again, because of the questions that have arisen on the legality and the binding nature of that contract, not just from you, but from Cerner, is that thing enforced? And we're talking over $1 million a year.
Right.
So we're going to be going through 2020. I think it is absolutely necessary for you as trustees to get legal advice to address those specific questions. And again, it's not just Cerner. We've got the associated expenses now that we're going to be talking about renewing through 2020.
Right.
I think as fiduciaries that you have a duty to eliminate those questions and to do it in a privileged environment with your counsel. Whatever the outcome, whatever vote you decide to do, I think you need to be acting under the umbrella of advice of counsel.
Right. And if we wanted to look at other counsel, so like the county attorney, would that be somebody we could at least get some information from or help from, or?
I believe so.
Recommendations?
We have done RFPs before for counsel. My recollection is that the county attorney does provide some legal advice to the district.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think, because we do work with various attorneys and in order to make sure that there is objectivity, I think if the county attorney's office is available and would make an attorney available to you to assist with the drafting of the RFP and or maybe to provide an attorney resource, I think that would be good. I mean, you're clearly in a major transition as a trust in terms of how your operations there is done. And I think anything you can do to add that element of objectivity to the debate, I think would be a resource. Not necessary, but I think it might be a good move to make. And again, we have drafted RFPs for legal counsel before. They're pretty straightforward.
Okay.
So that would be to just draft different legal counsel?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
What would the RFP be for?
Legal counsel to the trust.
To hire another attorney.
Hire
different
a
attorney.
law firm.
Right.
If you're not certain about your current one, you have one now. We don't know the process was selected. If you'd like to go through a process, an open competitive process of some form where you would go through, as you hired us, something similar to that, go out, we'll circulate it to firms that have experience dealing with trusts, local counsel, whatever process you want to do, advertising. We would run it through the business office and then have them come in and answer your questions.
So take me through a timeline of what you're recommending, because we have a lease that we need to deal with by January 31st.
Okay,
I understand, but I need, what are all these timeline pieces? Because to me, it makes more sense to get the data calculated, but maybe that's not happening first. So
we're moving forward now. My assumption right now is we're going to move forward separately on the issue of the costs.
okay,
That's going to happen. We're also assuming we're going to move forward on negotiating a lease that will parallel the current dates as understood in the Cerner contract. That's going to happen. Separately, I'm suggesting that right now with your counsel, or what counsel of your choosing, that you review the legality of the existing Cerner contract to make sure that it's in force, that you're comfortable it's in force. Then the fourth one would be in the event you would like us to move forward with conducting an RFP process, we would do that, and we could initiate that at pretty much any time. We could start the drafting process for a request for proposal for counsel going forward, separate from any of those three items.
So on commercial, and I'll ask you this, Hal, because this is your bailiwick, on commercial leases, if we know that, for example, if our Cerner agreement is April or June, I can't remember what it is, and we want to coincide the property lease agreement with that, can that property agreement be done annually to renew on that same day each year, or does it, so it doesn't have to be 3 years, it can be whatever.
14 months, 8, and then
Do
renewal
whatever the
annually
owner,
from that point.
the owner of the property agrees. But sure, they could do that. They could renew on an annual basis.
Okay.
There's a lot of times you'll have a lease, it'll be a 3 or 5 year lease, and then they'll have annual options thereafter.
Well, that's the ones I've been familiar
Sure.
with, is after a certain block of time, then it's an annual thing.
Could be,
I guess
sure.
that's,
Right.
I guess would be
That's
the
not,
way we
it's
want.
not unusual.
Not unusual, okay.
So cost-wise on this, Aaron, are these, like if you did an RFP for an attorney, is that in addition to what services you're providing now, or that falls under the umbrella?
It's all included in the fee.
Okay,
No additional cost.
I always like to know that.
Good question.
We run, and for the record, Madam Chair, how many RFPs we need to run, they're all included. There's no limit. Some years we'll do 4, some years we'll do none. It tends to blend out over time.
Sure, okay, I appreciate that, thanks.
Good. I know we have Gilsbar here that drove all the way from,
Oh, no, I'm with ECA.
oh, okay, that's right, I'm sorry.
Like, no,
You actually must have, they were on the phone, all right, Joyce. I have a 6-hour drive ahead of me, so I'm not thinking very straight.
I've got a 6-minute drive ahead of me.
Yeah, well, yeah, cool. Sorry.
No worries.
All right, anything further for discussion?
I think we covered it.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned at 4:12.